Thanks for joining our show. All right. How many people in our studio audience have been to Arbor Crest up on the hill? Yeah. And you probably tried the wines. Have you been to one of the Friday night music things? Yeah.
Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Oh, you just go all the time. Oh.
I go for the tulips.
She's like the #1 customer for you. Awesome. Well, Jim, again, thank you. This is our first show, our first talk show like this, so I appreciate you being able to do this with us. Can everyone hear us okay? We don't have any microphones today, so. Well, I'd like to start out with a little background on Arbor Crest, and this is straight from the website. And it says, Arbor Crest Wine Cellars at the Cliff House Estate is described as a crown jewel of the Inland Northwest, a historic property in Spokane, Washington with award-winning wines, delightful events, stunning views, and park-like grounds that dazzle in every season. That sounds fantastic. I love that. Did you work on it? Did you work on that as an internal team?
Yeah, I think there's a collaboration, definitely. So.
It's a nice statement. It makes people want to go there. So, well, let's talk a little bit about the start of the winery and kind of the background.
Sure. Well, it's kind of exciting to tell the story because, as we all know, your story is kind of your personality and your company. Arbor Crest started with Christina's parents, my wife, and her uncle, having been in the cherry industry for like 30 years, making pie filling for Dolly Madison and Hostess, and realizing in the late 70s that people were going to stop drinking a glass of coffee and having cherry pie. And they made 5-gallon tubs of the cherry pie filling and had farmed in the valley since the early 1950s. And Uncle Dave came to Harry and Marcia, my in-laws, and said, look, things are going to switch fairly swiftly. We got to get out of the cherry business here. They did a U-pick farm, so strawberries and other vegetables as well. But Harry loved wine and Dave loved to farm, and Harry's like, why don't we grow grapes? So they thought they could grow grapes in Spokane. We all know that we have pretty harsh winters here. So grapes just can't get ripe every year on a consistent basis. And so they said, well, we can get grapes from the Columbia Valley. And within like a year of that conversation, they bought a winery that had gone out of business in California, had all the equipment trucked up here, and they started making wine. And Uncle Dave ran the winery for about 18 years. 1982 it was started. Arbor Crest was the 29th winery in Washington State. 18 years later, Dave calls my wife Christina, who'd been making wine in California for probably 6 years, went to UC Davis, got a fermentation science degree, and calls Christina and says, hey, I'm done. We're either selling the business or you need to get up here and run it. I think that weekend, I think we got a call on Monday, that Friday we came up for the weekend and he showed us around and we kind of evaluated the current status of Arbor Crest. Went back, wrote a business plan, presented it to her parents, and they're like, well, you guys can come up and run it if you want. And so our only caveat was that we wanted autonomy to kind of shift and change and be able to run it ourselves. And within a month of that phone call, we were moved. And so it was really quite a quick transition. But my background also happened to be in the vineyard side. So I was just telling Charlie that I drive a 1972 pickup that we bought in Napa, California still. It's going on 48 years old this year. And I went with my uncle through the vineyards, Yountville, Oakville. We had a label, they had Loben Sels cellars there in Oakville. And walking across the fermentation tanks, lighting the smudge pots to keep the vineyards from freezing in the spring, going up on the fans. And that was kind of my hands-on experience on the vineyard side. So here we are, college, I meet Christina, we get married, and her uncle calls and said, come run Arbor Crest. So we came to Spokane in 1999. There were 132 wineries at that time, 21 years ago. And most of it was grocery stores. The real wine scene in Washington really was starting to evolve, but It wasn't until about probably 5 to 10 years ago where Washington was really recognized as a premium wine grape growing region, the second largest in the United States. And as of today, there are 1,000 wineries. But each winery has their own story. What makes Arbor Crest unique is our estate. And that was picked up 2 years after we became a winery. We were making wine at the production facility where we are right now. So in 1984, Uncle Dave had a relationship and somehow got connected with the Riblet family and got an exclusive offer on the table. And the thing that sealed that deal was the case of wine for every Riblet family member for 10 years. So I still remember Harry, my father-in-law, telling me that. I'm like, yeah, okay, wine can seal a deal. So anyway, we've been here 21 years, and it's more competitive than it's ever been in our industry. We're second generation and really kind of in a transition now, kind of taking over the helm from the ownership standpoint. So a lot of emotions go with running a family business. Rick and I were just talking about you got to take family out of business because then you can actually run your business. And I think that's going to be my new motto for this year, transitions and change. But that's kind of the story of Arbor Crest, and we're kind of looking forward to the next 20 plus years running the helm with our team because it's all about a team. So.
That's fantastic.
Kind of long-winded, but
I love hearing. No, but the background is really interesting, and it's just was meant to be.
Yeah.
Between you and Christina, and everything fell into place.
I like to say I sleep with the winemaker.
Yeah.
But that's 24 years. We've been married.
Well, fantastic. Well, you are in the wine business, but you're also in the entertainment business. How do you juggle the priorities between selling wine and entertaining the masses here in Spokane?
It's kind of interesting, and I told a few people about how the wine industry has changed. So I grew up in Napa. It was a traditional model. You went into the tasting room, you met the winemaker, you probably met the owner who was the winemaker, and they would taste you through the wines, and you would walk through the barrel room, and you would see it firsthand with the owners. And here we are 30, 40 some years later, Washington State emerging. The model has shifted. You can even see it here in Spokane. We have 24 wineries. A tasting room experience is now an employee that's removed from the actual production facility. They're just tasting you on a flight of their wines. Maybe it's a place for a wine club. But that model has shifted. So when we came to the table, we realized that the estate was really underutilized. It was kind of a sleeper winery. For those of you that remember back a while, the tasting room was actually in the Cliff House in the old garage, and it only held 10 people. So as we looked at it and evaluated all the potential energy that it had, we're like, how can we take some of our really quiet days of the week and make them more productive and revenue generating? Well, Sunday just happened to be a dead day. Rarely did we see a customer on Sunday, but we were open. And they had started a thing called the Checkerboard series. So they would stay open till sunset on Sundays, and you could play checkers and bring a picnic. And we had 2 employees. I remember we're going to continue this being open. 2 employees, my 2 labs at the time, and I think our crowd started at about 75 people, and we were overwhelmed, running out of the 2-car garage. And I'm like, why would anybody come up just for the sunset? So we're like, let's add a one-piece band, and it was Mark Sorger who had been playing down at the Spokane Club, saxophone and keyboard, and he was charging us like $100. I'm like, well, okay, it's worth it to invest in this. So that was how it started, and 20 years later, we're doing 1,200 people, 25 to 30 employees. And it's just, you have to take your ideas, and if you're passionate about it and you plan and you're strategic, you can kind of grow them. My title at the company, which our team always laughs about, is alternative revenue. So kind of thinking outside of the box, what do you want? How can you grow your company outside of the traditional model? So we have sponsorships now with, our bank has been an awesome sponsor the last 15 years. And it allows us to underwrite and build programs so that we don't have to front all the cost of developing stuff. we're doing tours now, and that has just exploded. We were one of the first wineries to add tasting fees, but that kind of allows us to open more wine and have that accessible to our customers. So the entertainment side was one of those things I'm like, it's just a no-brainer. Entertainment and wine, why not? But now we're going food, entertainment, 7 days a week, extended hours. And we do music 2 nights a week, 52 weeks out of the year now. And it started as just a Sunday concert, then it went to Thursday and Sundays, that was June until September, now it's May until October, and then, yeah, that's just,
So
ask the question
52
and
weeks
go.
a year, you do entertainment
Yeah.
of some sort, but I'm assuming that the spring and summer then are your busier times,
Yeah.
or is it just
spring and summer.
spreading out now?
Our goal was to grow year-round traffic, and adding the music built customer base, but going to the music year-round and making sure people know our doors are open 7 days a week. I think a lot of people thought when the music stopped, we were closed. And so, kind of like the Cliff House fire, those that were around in 2009, we just passed our 10-year anniversary. The media said, oh, the house burned down. So everybody thought we couldn't make wine and that our tasting room wasn't open. Technically, that building was used just as a showpiece, and everything else was functional. But we spent about 6 months doing media relations, trying to let people know the doors are still open, we still have inventory. Like it's just very interesting perception. So balancing has been what will generate revenue for the company, and are there other ways to generate revenue? For example, ticket sales became, there's no cost. It covers all of our staffing. It covers parking lot crew, making sure that we have signage. So we've been able to generate revenue from not just selling a bottle of wine, and that's kind of what has kept us now afloat, because the wholesale model, which most wineries were founded on grocery stores and bottle shops, it's so competitive with 1,000 wineries in Washington State now. Retail's where it's all happening, and so we've been able to flip our model. We were wholesale 20 years ago, and now we're over 80% of our revenue comes from our retail. So adapt and change, that's the motto. 2020 transition.
That's great feedback for everyone, and I have been up there myself for busy events, and that parking lot is just a whole other department. It seems like there's a lot going on there just to park and get into.
I actually have a big P branded down here because I run so much in the parking lot. Parking ambassador. But if people can get in and out and find parking easily, it makes their experience so much better. So that was one of the biggest things when we got there. There was a one-way entranceway, if those of you that were back up there, with juniper bushes, and it was only I think it was a 12-foot gate, so when a bus came in, it had to fold its mirror in, and it could barely get in, and then people would start down and another car would come up, and I'm like, we got to fix this, you know. It's just flow dynamics. People don't like that kind of compaction. So we added parking, and I'm still adding parking, and I can park about 2,500 people right now. So, you know, I'm hoping to get to 5,000. That's more than I wanted to.
Wow.
So always build for the future.
Well, fantastic. Well, it sure is beautiful when you're sitting up on the hill and listening to the music and sipping your wine. I know I love it. Now, do you always drink wine, and do you have a sophisticated palate, and how long does that take to develop?
So do I always drink wine? That could be considered a trick question. Patty's shaking her head back there. The industry motto is it takes a lot of good beer to make great wine, but I'm not the winemaker, so vodka gets me to my destination first, and then I taste wine. But wine drinking is, and tasting is experiential, I guess you could say. And even though I grew up in the vineyards, I really hadn't consumed a lot of wine before I met Christina's family. My first wine was Riesling. Everybody kind of starts on what we call sticky wines, sweet. And Washington State actually founded itself on Riesling. That was probably the largest planted varietal. But there's a natural progression, just like anything. You start with the basics, and then you kind of get a more sophisticated palate. So it went to Chardonnay, was kind of the next favorite of mine, and then kind of the lighter wines, Sangiovese and Merlot, and then to Cab. And Christina always laughed because the family would be swirling the glass, and the glass is just to get the nose, and your sense of smell also affects your taste. So they're like swirling it and sniffing it, and they're like, stick your nose in there, what do you smell? I'm like, okay. That brain to mouth, Shelby knows sometimes I just throw random things when we're tasting wine together going, what do you smell? I'm like, oh, old shoe? No. But there's that brain connect and trying to describe things. And I would just say the first thing that came to mind, and Christina's like, where'd that come from? But I'd be on most of the time. It was just blind luck. But training your brain to kind of smell and just experience wine, and wine is meant to go with food, is kind of how her style of winemaking is. But over the years, you just learn a little bit of a vocabulary. Raspberries, cherry, you know. Some people even say Bing cherry. I'm like, I can't tell the difference between Bing and Bing. It's cherry. But, you know, we talk about it in the tasting room. How do you keep it so that the consumer's having a great experience and you don't overtalk them? And so you just make it a comfortable conversation. And I think that's something that I've always felt really comfortable with Christina. I just say what comes to mind. And so, but, you know, I love every wine. If you ask her what her favorite wine is, she's like, I love them all. Because they're just like kids. You can't love one more than the other. But I would take Dionysus any day. Anyway.
How many of you are amateur wine tasters? Are you swirl and you're like, oh, I can taste the vanilla. Oh, this is oaky. I mean, how many of you are doing that when you're doing the wine? I know I am.
This is my meter, you know. Yeah, it's a thumb up, thumb down. And Christine's like, really? I'm like, well, that's as easy as it gets, right? I like that. I don't like that. It's okay. So, yeah. You know, you kind of have to make it fun, and I think that's one of our goals. Is we have a lot of people that come in for their first experiences when they're 21, 22, and they haven't had a lot of wine, so you start them on the sweeter wines, and then they're like, oh, that's not bad, and then you give them a dry red, and they're like, ooh, you know, shocked, kind of. So, yeah.
Right. Well, fun. That's fantastic. All right. What's important for business owners in the Spokane area right now?
I think we talked about it at our table a lot, leveraging, communication, timing. But Spokane is a very people community. It's all about the handshake, being engaged in the community and participating. Seeing Alicia again, and I think it's been a year and a half, 2 years, but there's a direct connect as soon as you see someone that you've met. And Spokane has that personal connection. And I mean, Nadine, you could talk about it with GSI and how tight the business community is and the leadership within town. I mean, Romeo with the catering, you see all different aspects of entertaining, and it's a very small community, even though we're such a large population base. And I think what's going to be neat the next 10, 15 years, you know, Coeur d'Alene's going to get folded into that conversation, and we're going to become one kind of unified region. And it's exciting to see that component come together. But it's, you know, you can't just do your own thing without engaging in the community. I was just talking to Jared McGregor with the Inlander. He's one of the owners, and he and his brother run it. And he's like, you know, they've been running the Inlander, by the way, for 27 years. He's like, the first 10 or 12 years, we just kind of did our own thing. And he's like, all of a sudden, we're like, we've got to engage more and get on boards and participate. And we just had this conversation yesterday, and it's so important to engage. We talk about it at GSI all the time. It's a participatory community. And Rick, I mean, you could probably talk about all the people, the touch points that you've had. Those people come back, and you see them all again and again, and it's great. They don't have that in Seattle. That's one of the unifier, the Valley Ambassador.
Well, we don't want to stand between everyone and their lunch. That's never a good thing, or their alcohol, as if it was later in the day. But can I ask you one more question? Is that okay, Ted? Do you have time? Okay. Well, what excites you most about your business right now? If you just could name one thing that's really exciting.
Change. The only constant is change. And we live that every day at Arbor Crest. So Sean knows that. I go to work out and I hurt when I leave. That's change, right? Growth is painful, and but change is good.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, does anyone have a question for Jim? Any questions?
Martinis will be served. What?
Did he bring wine?
No, but I whine a lot.
I do have a question.
Yes.
As millennials age, are they becoming your customers and as loyal as older generations?
How many people are familiar with Kendall Jackson? Kendall Jackson did this 30 years ago. They got in with the baby boomers, and they dominated the market for almost 30 years. The baby boomers are kind of drinking less and having attrition. They're going to have to reinvent themselves. They used to be the standard, the gold standard on the wine menus. You would always see Kendall Jackson. Millennials are kind of in that same dynamic in that they're a larger group, and it's funny, I was just having a conversation about, I call myself on the heels of giants or in the shadows, because there's a generation that's 15 plus years older that's the leadership, the patriarchs of our community, and then there's the millennials, and then there's the groups that are such a smaller population base and demographic in between. But millennials are gonna kind of lead the next chapter and be at the forefront of discussions. They don't drink as much, they're not as high a consumer, and you're starting to see in the grocery stores in all of the sections the packaging changes with one-off cans of wine and screw cap champagne that are one servings. Like, those are really geared towards millennials, and that is something that's a real component. We talk about it on the employment side too. Millennials, we had that conversation at the table today. Old model was you stayed at your company for 30 years. 10 years ago it was a 15 to 20 year model. Now it's a 1 to 5 year. That's a millennial influence, I think. It's not going to go away. But you can adapt and you can change and you modify your program. So we're looking at social media. We invest a lot more in our social media platforms because that's how millennials like to get their information. They don't want a phone call. We were talking about a little bit of how important the touch, like paper pieces or a phone call. Well, that's almost a generational component, even though if you put the right piece in front of them, oh yeah, they'll look at it. But, so yeah, we're adapting every minute.
Do you export?
No, so this is interesting. I'll keep it short. We've switched our model, so we're no longer that wholesale model. So we really said with 1,000 wineries in Washington State, there's 35 plus thousand wineries worldwide. We said we're not competing in that anymore. If it organically starts, like we're in Texas, if it organically starts and it's got good momentum, we're going to go after it. But we're going to stay focused and be on our destination and make retail the #1 priority. And so that's a huge shift, going from what you founded your company on to what we are today, two totally different companies. And I think Telect in town has done a great job of reinventing themselves multiple times. And I just saw Trina at our workout the other morning, and she's like, yeah, if you don't adapt in the technology industry, you'll be passed, you'll be bypassed. So, my word again, change. Thank you guys.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jim.